Hello everybody, it's Max with Crypto Talk now. Supply chain, it's a real problem.
Look at this, sold out. Can you believe this stuff?
So they were supposed to deliver it in October.
This is going to be an update on the kettlebell shortage of 2020.
I just want my shoe. Give me my shoe, please.
Then it was supposed to be November. No. Then December.
Give me my PlayStation! Am I wrong for wanting this, bro? I mean, everything just sucks lately.
Take my money. Take my money. I don't want it. Give me my shoe.
Every time I check my email, it's stuck on this right here. I don't even know what that means.
Tonight, one word sums up the feeling along every line of the supply chain: frustration.
Well, the shortages and delays in the global supply chain threaten a total paralysis.
When the pandemic hit, businesses anticipated that the COVID recession was coming. They thought that demand was going to drop. But something funny happened. The opposite of what all of these businesses and economists predicted happened. Demand exploded. People bought things like crazy, and now supply chains are choking on that record demand. Everyone has had the experience of not being able to get something, and everyone has had the experience of paying more for something. Prior to the pandemic, most of us just took it for granted that we could get things ever faster. E-commerce made it seem like everything was right at our doorstep. But that obscures what was a 14,000-mile journey halfway around the world. It took months, and when you add up all the automation, all the algorithms, all of the hundreds of people who had to touch those goods or transport them in some way, it's in total one of the most complicated endeavors that human beings ever engage in, and yet it happens millions of times per day, and we take it for granted because all of that has been rolled behind this ultimate convenience of just one-click e-commerce shopping. But the pandemic showed us just how unsustainable and unrealistic that expectation is.
So how does Quant help solve some of these supply chain problems? Well, let's be honest. The answer basically is through the likes of Overledger. But how specifically does this get done? Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's specific Quant coverage. I'm going to go ahead and full screen this. And as you can see right here, it starts off with this particular piece, and it comes straight from the Quant site. States supply chain and trade finance. As some of us know, blockchains are bringing clarity and certainty to areas such as procurement, logistics, provenance, and on top of that, customs and payments, basically helping to make notoriously complex global supply chains much more efficient. Now, when we jump more into this, check this out yourself. It says, enabling a new generation of supply chains. For instance, it says, in today's globally interconnected sourcing and trading environment, fast and secure and cost-efficient supply chains are essential. It doesn't take much to understand how crucial it is, especially post-pandemic. Let's be honest. It says, yet many still rely on paper-based processes, making them slow, costly, and susceptible to fraud. Yeah, to say the least, right? While blockchain technology is making progress in addressing these problems, the real breakthrough will come when supply chains can connect and seamlessly and securely with financial and payment systems. On top of that, what is the real challenge from all this? Well, let's face it, there's quite a few challenges. But how can Quant basically help solve this at scale that nobody else is really doing, right? Well, obviously through Overledger. But check this out. It says, supply chains and financial systems use different blockchains, which cannot easily interoperate. We already understand how we can draw that Quant connection. It says, until this challenge of interoperability is met, the full potential of blockchain for supply chains and trade finance will not be realized. So for instance, by introducing complete DLT interoperability, Quant eliminates the problem at source, By allowing seamless connectivity of each participant's systems and networks, stakeholders are not forced onto the same single distributed ledger technology instance and can have all the benefits of an interlinked ledger without the complexity of multiple infrastructure. We facilitate, as in Quant, reducing friction in international trade, RFIT, integrated payments across supply chain. On top of that, Quant, through Overledger, provides the building blocks to make this all happen. Quant solutions for supply chain and trade finance are built using their patent-pending products. For one, Overledger, which is what? The world's first blockchain-agnostic API gateway. Overledger Integrate. Integrate is Quant's Gateway Core API. It enables you to create blockchain applications that will run on any chain faster, cheaper, and without the need for specialist development staff. On top of that, Overledger Tokenize. Create secure digital tokens without writing a single line of code. And how do we know that? Well, one of the secure digital tokens happened to be LEOX, the first QRC20 token, and was deployed and released for exchange on LCX. On top of that, supply chains and trade finance around the world are being reimagined basically using blockchain. If you want to find out more, you could definitely go to this particular deep dive straight from the Quant site. Now, as I'm providing you guys a particular deep dive, well, let's get more into this. So, there was this particular piece from Medium, and it basically summarizes some of this, but I'll get right to this particular point. The idea of combining apps goes far beyond just decentralized finance. This is what the future of all applications will be, interacting with supply chain, decentralized identities, financial platforms, healthcare, IoT, as well as interacting with non-blockchain networks, all in scalable interoperability way, following globally recognized standards, and without imposing restrictions on the underlying blockchains or adding additional overhead latency / bottleneck. In specific, the Overledger network will enable developers to select their favorite blockchains and API services and combine them to build exciting new products with scalable interoperability. How do we know that? Well, obviously through Quant's Overledger. And for quite a few of us, right, we have already seen this particular chart. And Quant basically connects all this. Payment APIs. Many of us use many of these particular ones we see here. Blockchains that, let's face it, the new ones, the old ones, you name it. Banking APIs. Internet of Trust APIs. And so on. On top of that, let me take more of a deeper look into this. It states here, this specifically, and if anything, this will be a great example for how Quant is helping the Australian government solve supply chain issues. Now, Scott Wilkie, who happens to be the director of AU Cloud, stated that the Australian government, Department of Defense, and major industries are using or testing blockchain to interact with their supply chain critical infrastructure, national record keeping, and financial services. These specific organizations require the interoperable functionality that can only come with an operating system like Overledger, and the security of the leading sovereign Australian cloud platform. Listen to this. Without Overledger, none of these projects or systems will be able to communicate with each other or enable cross-party collaboration. Now, Gilbert Verdian, as we know, CEO Quant, was quoted to say this. Specifically, he says, "We have been working with AU Cloud for more than a year on how best to integrate our blockchain operating system onto the AU Cloud platform to provide highly secure interoperable blockchain as a service for Australian government and defense and the critical national industries and supply chains that serve the nation. The idea of the overledger stemmed from the challenges faced while working in senior roles across definitive projects for both the UK and Australian governments, and subsequently led to founding the blockchain ISO standard TC307 in 2016. If you want more information on what TC307 is all about, please check out one of the previous Quant recordings provided here from CTN. On top of that, you see this. Overledger also seamlessly connects existing networks and the internet to the blockchain, allowing government and enterprises to harness the power of blockchain to address real-world challenges. And here's a great example. In China, some of those real-world challenges that will be explored include anti-money laundering, as well as broader applications in the healthcare and supply chain sectors. Getting a little bit more into our particular coverage, I took more of a deeper dive into the specifics of what was going on in Australia. So supply chain was basically fragile, right? It states that, it's in existential threat. Sorry for my pronunciation on that. I read quite a bit sometimes. It just kind of rolls off the tongue real bad sometimes. For the nation. Now look at this. Australia faces its most acute existential crisis since World War II. Wow. This article was actually originally posted on October 6th of 2022. Therefore, it's still pretty recent and relative to what we're talking about here today. Now, like I mentioned, since World War II, there's been a threat to the Australian government's supply chains, and let's face it, the rest of the world. And of course, this was sparked by the pandemic, and it was basically exacerbated by the war in Europe, specifically, the Russia-Ukraine war. That is the view of two of the nation's leading experts in supply chain resilience from the prestigious Melbourne Business School and leading global professional services firm Accenture. Now, when we get a little bit further down, it mentions MBS's director of the Center for Business Analytics, Professor Yalkin Ake, says the fragility of our supply chains was glaringly exposed, of course, by COVID. And on top of that, as an island nation, Australia conducts 98% of its trade through its ports, compared to the global average of 90%. So their ports are essential to the supply chain. Global disruptions in sea freight and increasing costs of container shipping pose heightened challenges, of course, for Australia. So I would agree that this is the largest disruption we have had since World War II, according to what he says. Now, in regards to this, it says, Akay says, tuning your supply chain for maximum resilience is a great balancing act. Now, I want to take a moment to comment basically on this. You can understand where we're going with this, the Quant connection, and we'll definitely establish specifically that Quant connection here in a bit. What you can choose to do with your supply chain is a continuous spectrum. At the one end, you have the cheapest way to run things, but not reliable at all. And at the other end, you might have a bulletproof supply chain, but maybe prohibitively expensive to run. And that is a very good point. When it comes to Quant, we've had examples that we shared here at our particular, our station/channel of providing you guys those specifics, right? About how with Quant, with Overledger, they are able to help businesses that would normally take 3 to 4 years to complete some of these high achieving tasks. In some cases, 8 months. How? Again, with Overledger, Quant's operating system. Now, building resilience requires a mindset shift at the organization level. Supply chain managers should welcome the idea that an optimized, resilient supply chain is not necessarily the most cost-efficient one. I just use the example, for instance, of a cost-efficient example with Overledger. Rather, an optimized, resilient supply chain is a configuration of this entire supply network which achieves the desired level of reliability at the minimal possible cost. Now, of course, there's more in regards to this, but I'm going to jump down a little bit more further, and that is some of these other things I want to share with you. Here it goes, right here. It says, organizations need to fully understand what supply chain resilience entails. A preliminary requirement of resilience is, of course, to correctly identify the suppliers that impose a greater risk. I couldn't agree more. Now, I'm going to jump into the next particular page, because if anything, it kind of pounds it home a little bit more in regards to the specifics of supply chain. So again, this is referring to the Australian government, and it says specifically, the big question is whether these pressures will fall away in the next years as the global supply chain adapts and overcomes, or whether the cost will be forever baked into the transport expenses of companies worldwide, pushing up our cost of living permanently, and especially when it comes to post-pandemic. Now listen to some of these specifics. It says, with the Australian economy worth, listen to this, 2.42 trillion, and with supply chain unreliability costing companies 47 cents per average in lost revenue around the world, Australian firms are forfeiting, listen to this also, 11.4 billion a year in sales according to the TMX Global Analysis. And then last but not least, according to the Reserve Bank of Australia, pandemic-related supply chain issues have occurred in 2 phases since early 2020. Now, for those who are still with me, with us in regards to this, you may be saying, well, this is a lot of information in regards to the Australian government. How does it apply to the likes of Quant? I promise you, we're going to get there. Now, another thing I want to point out is this right here. And this is good, because if anything, we need to understand that Quant is, when I mention that, it's so much more than just, central banks and whatnot, right? It's solving, when you hear Gilbert Verdian say, we are solving things at scale, basically, more than anybody else out there. He isn't kidding about that. Why? Well, look at this. Quant currently offers multiple services for enterprises and startups with options such as multi-ledger tokens for minting, multiple DLT stablecoins from fiat funds. This service is geared towards financial institutions, supply chain industries, and fintech firms, allowing these firms to lock up funds in escrow and mint tokens as, or I should say, of equivalent value. So you don't necessarily have to be a first world country, right? And if anything, you could be a third world country, right? So I'm not saying Australia is a third world country, but it's not limiting things to, let's face it, first world policies, right? So it says these tokens can then be utilized upon any other DLT, public or private. End-to-end DLT is another service Quant offers and is targeted towards supply chain and companies using multiple distributed ledger technologies. Now, since we're on the topic of supply chain, obviously logistics is tied into supply chain, right? I mean, you can't pretty much say one sentence without mentioning logistics when it comes to just that, supply chain. Now, procurement, logistics, provenance, and customs all require different DLTs that cannot communicate with each other. Overledger solves this through a single API that allows for convenient app developments that allow all DLTs to be utilized in unison. Overledger has also built distributed ledger networks for users to build upon other networks such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple. Now, let's get into this. This is good stuff. I saw this and I said to myself, you know what? I promised everybody that I would draw that particular Quant connection when it came to supply chain / logistics. And again, it wouldn't be a proper Quant video without at least one of the Quant All-Stars to provide us some information for this particular case study, if you will. The one and only, the great Quant Papa. Please, by all means, if you're a fan of Quant and you use Twitter actively, follow him. He could definitely use it. and he could appreciate, I'm sure he'll appreciate the support. He provides really, really great coverage, some of these deep dives, some of these clips that you see here, and so on. Very, very useful tools for for the community, to say the least. Now, Quant, seafood, MasterCard, right? Like it says, OVL, right? The blue economy, specifically the fish supply chain, right? I'm a big fan of seafood. Maybe you're not, but nonetheless, look at this. Provenance live cases, seafood traceability from ocean to grocery stores. Perfect example. Partner with Invisible Food System. The solution is distributed through, for this example, Topco, which is a coop of over 50 regional grocers that in aggregate form the second largest grocery network basically in the United States. Topco and Invisible traceability program starts, of course, with seafood. You see, for instance, the seafood counter. Then it goes from there to frozen packaging. Then for number 3, it says value-added meals. And of course, a few of those particular members are Topco, Food City. I have foods, I go to Food City here in Phoenix for avocados, and I even bought a super value pack, right? $3.97 a pound during this crazy supply chain problem. Why? Probably to lure people in the store. But whatever the case be, there's some other very recognizable members. As we get further into it, excuse me, here's how some of this works. So it says build your supply chain from multiple data streams. You have the organizations as shown here, data about companies and their products and locations. You have supply chain events happening to items as they move through the supply chain. For instance, Internet of Trust sensor data from IoT sensors such as temperatures, geolocation, humidity, etc., right? And then you have documents, key data about documents through their life cycle, payment transactions, data about payment transactions between supply chain parties. And who's at the middle of this? Well, it's MasterCard. But if anything, you have to have that provenance solution. And on top of that, you need blockchain. Now, who is able to actually get this done at scale? Like we mentioned, that nobody else can provide. And in my opinion, a monopoly. Let's be honest about it. It's Quant. And of course, from there, you have somehow this also works. It goes to this particular area where they can leverage tools to process data, to automate and optimize supply chains, so on and so forth, with some of these smart logic and triggers, notifications, analytics, MasterCard portfolio. You get the gist, right? On top of that, there's a little bit more, of course, the particular technical solution architecture, right? And if anything, you can have a broader perspective of how, again, this specifically works. So, if anything, let's kind of see if I can blow it up a little more. Let me see if I can. I'm going to blow this up just a tad bit more. Nope, it won't work that way because of Twitter. So I do apologize for that. Let me zoom in and this is the most I could go in, guys. But look at this, technical solution architecture. Right? You have the ERP systems, TMS systems, onboarding, other systems with source data. Now, as far as the specifics and when it comes to the integration, or quote-unquote simple integration, states integration is made easy through our out-of-box solution, which includes a software development kit and REST APIs. Also includes hands-on support team to identify and address any gaps in and out-of-box solutions. There's a particular modular. And again, it breaks this all down, right? The MasterCard provenance solution, and then from there where it goes to blockchain, right? But if anything, this is supposed to manage blockchain complexity. Like it says right here, it says manages the complexity of blockchains so you can focus on solving for your use case and scaling your solution instead of building and maintaining infrastructure. And of course, they give this particular example of provenance live cases, Intel IoT sensors, and so on, right? But with Overledger, think about it in itself. They make all this interoperable, and if anything, they take a lot of the time consumption out of the equation, which of course is definitely a problem when it comes to what? Supply chain. Now, before we close things out, I'm going to come back in the frame here. I want to actually show you guys this particular clip, which is Gilbert Veridian basically mentioning how Quant helps solve some of these supply chain problems, and then we'll come right.
Thank you. Gilbert Verdian, founder and CEO of Quant Network. So we're the infrastructure. So what we've done is solved interoperability at scale by interconnecting the underlying blockchains at scale to have interoperability between different types of blockchains, but existing platforms and networks. And in the supply chain, we're doing quite a lot in the fisheries space, which I can explain a bit. Yeah, I mean, we have an example where today we announced in the sustainability space under seafood supply chain, we've allowed interoperability between, sea to table, and being able to source where the fish is being caught, the type of fish, and reduce wastage, reduce fraud. Someone says I only caught 10 kilos, but they caught 20 kilos or whatever it is. And this was done with a government body in Australia, where for them it's a $3 trillion industry. I mean, this is not small, but having inclusion right from the fishermen and having smart devices with the boxes that can measure things, using applications on phones, and then following that all the way to the table. It was the most difficult part by allowing everyone to be a participant, and you can't have the barrier to say, well, sorry, you're a fisherman, you need to be able to do X, Y, and Z. They're not going to change their processes just for you. Everyone has to adopt a common thread, as it was said. And if you're successful and if you're doing that, then that supply chain and the trade flows, and then the benefits again come back to the consumer.
Just like he said, if supply chain flows, the benefits come back to the consumer. How are you able to accomplish that? Well, I loved his particular example where he basically, mentions some of those specific things, eliminating waste. And if anything, that, of course, saves countries money. We, from wherever we live, we may not fully realize it at the scale that, for instance, governments are basically trying to solve that, right? The waste problem, but it definitely adds up, let's face it. And if anything, when we are able to eliminate waste and have savings, then it's like he mentioned, that flows back to the consumer. Instead of us getting hit with crazy fees for, a pair of sneakers or, a box of, or a package of Oreos that, normally would cost like $2 or something like that. And now it's like $6.30. Last I checked, from a few of my friends who live in New York. Yeah, it's New York. It costs a lot more and so on. But heck, even here in Phoenix, Arizona, I go down to the supermarket and a sale on a dozen eggs is $5. Are you kidding me? A sale? A dozen and a half eggs? I'm looking at as much as $8. It's ridiculous. Even milk, right? So we totally have a supply chain issue. Here's the main thing, right? So some people will say, well, Max, the whole thing with supply chain, I mean, it's not like Quant's going to be able to solve this immediately. But the point is this: when you hear of the likes of Quant exploding as far as market cap, a lot more people or organizations are going to take notice. Let's face it, a lot of people took notice when Bitcoin exploded. If Quant is going to be, when Quant is going to be, let's face it, in the top 5, could very well become the new number 1, if you will, right? If Quant is going to do that scale that nobody else is doing and have insane market caps in the future, let's face it, a lot of us have done our research, been watching some of these videos. We really do appreciate you guys and so on. But there's a lot of indicators to show that they're not just about solving problems with CBDCs and other things like that with payments and whatnot. Quant allows, for instance, like you saw in the particular chart, they solve the problems of payment APIs, banking APIs. I mean, these are a few of the things why we mention all these specific ones, and heck, even logistics, supply chain issues. So guys, there you have it. Was really glad to give you this particular deep dive when it comes to Quant being able to solve things at scale that nobody else is really doing when it comes to the supply chain problem. And that Australian government example, I think, was a really, really good example, to say the least, when it comes to specifically just that Quant. If you enjoy this type of coverage, by all means, please hit that like button. And if you really, really want more and more of this particular coverage and updates, Quant, some of these other ISOs and so on, we covered, for instance, LCX, and a lot of the other ISOs, please hit that bell notification. Last but not least, if you enjoy a live show, check us out every single day at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific for Crypto Talk Now. My name is Max. Thanks again for watching. Y'all have a blessed day. We will see you on the next one.